Following the announcement that John Pertwee would be leaving Doctor Who after 5 seasons, the search soon began for the 4th Doctor. The search eventually led producers to Tom Baker, an out-of-work actor who at the time was working on a building site. So, Doctor Who had a new Doctor, and a new era of television began. The first 4th Doctor story, Robot, began airing on the 28th December 1974. It maintains much of the regular unit cast from the previous era, with a new addition, Harry Sullivan as played by Ian Marter. Robot is a fun, excellent introduction to this new Doctor. It eased people into this new era by including many familiar elements such as the unit characters. Continuing as the Doctor's companion was Sarah Jane Smith as played by Elizabeth Sladen, who was introduced in the previous season. Harry Sullivan joined the TARDIS team, and so season 12 began. Unlike the previous era, much of the 4th Doctor's era was spent away from modern-day Earth. The unit era was over, though Unit and the likes of the Brigadier and Sergeant Benton would appear very occasionally in future episodes. Season 12 features appearances from the Sontarans, Daleks, and the Cybermen, all of whom are well-established returning foes. It makes Season 12 a somewhat unusual 4th Doctor season, as for the most part, returning adversaries were rarely used. Season 12 has a very high standard of stories, aside from Revenge of the Cybermen. One of the very best Doctor Who stories came in Season 12, and it was Genesis of the Daleks. With its dark tone, excellent performances, and superb storytelling, Genesis of the Daleks is still regarded as one of the greatest ever Doctor Who stories, well over 40 years since it was first broadcast. Davros is introduced here. Michael Wisher's performance is chilling and unnerving. Michael Wisher and Terry Nation's script created a Doctor Who icon. In his first season, Tom Baker totally made the role his own. It was unlike anything audiences had ever seen, and they loved it. Season 11, which was certainly a successful season, averaged around 8 million viewers. Season 12 averaged 10 million viewers. Tom Baker's debut season was a huge success, but the best was yet to come. Season 13 was when the 4th Doctor era really got into its stride. Under the guidance of producer Philip Hinchcliffe, who had been running the show since The Ark in Space, Doctor Who began to enjoy one of its most successful periods. Such classic stories in this season included Pyramids of Mars and The Brain of Morbius, two excellently written stories with a really terrific atmosphere. Ratings-wise, Season 13 was a slight improvement over the 12th season. The public certainly weren't yet tiring of Doctor Who. In September 1976, Doctor Who returned once again for its 14th season. It was the final season to be produced by Philip Hinchcliffe, and was therefore the last 4th Doctor season to have a darker, Hammer horror-inspired tone. From here on out, the 4th Doctor era became markedly sillier due to pressure from social campaigners. Season 14 pushed the show further than the previous 2 seasons managed. This was very much the evolution of Philip Hinchcliffe's producership. The Hand of Fear marked the departure of long-time companion Sarah Jane Smith. The story has an emotional ending, but perhaps controversially, the rest of the story isn't all that impressive. What carried this era of Who was the performances, especially the on-screen dynamic between Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen. Without that, the show was once again forced to evolve. The very next story was The Deadly Assassin, which featured the return of both the Time Lords and Gallifrey, but also the Master. The Master was played by Peter Pratt, and the character returned after a 3-year absence following the death of Roger Delgado, the original actor to play the part. The Master of the Pertwee era was a suave, charismatic gentleman. Here, the Master is very different. No comparisons can really be made between the two versions. Peter Pratt's version slots in perfectly into this Hammer horror-inspired era. The Deadly Assassin is regarded as one of the very best Doctor Who serials, much like many others around this very consistent era. New companion Leela, as played by Louise Jameson, was introduced in the face of evil. The 2 following stories resumed Season 14's very high standard. The Robots of Death is excellently written, with nice additions of comedy sprinkled occasionally throughout. Tom Baker very much made the role his own by this stage, no question. Season 14's finale, The Talons of Wang Chiang, is yet another excellent story. It has very good lighting and set design, which, given the limitations of the budget, makes it even more impressive. The first 3 seasons of the 4th Doctor era were utterly fantastic, but as there were changes behind the scenes, this meant a change in stories too. Graham Williams was the new producer of Doctor Who, with Season 15 being his first in charge. A lighter, more comedic tone was introduced, though that isn't at all that apparent in the season opener, Horror of Fang Rock. Horror of Fang Rock includes a very high death toll where only the Doctor and Leela survive the events. This story is uncharacteristically dark for this era of the programme. I have a certain preference for 4th Doctor stories, and I do very much prefer the Hinchcliffe era. Ultimately, the quality of Season 15 is a step down from previous seasons, but I know this season does have its fans. For me, not one story from the season really stands out as an all-time great. The season concludes with the terrible The Invasion of Time, a sloppily written story with poor production values. Classic Who had a low budget, but the great stories were able to disguise the cheapness to a degree. Here, it doesn't seem like they've even tried. Season 15 was also a step down as far as the ratings were concerned, with just shy of 9 million on average tuning in. It was by no means a failure, but perhaps interest in Doctor Who was waning. Season 16 16 marked a big change to Doctor Who's format. Season 16 followed the Doctor on a quest to find the segments to the Key to Time. I can appreciate the change in format, as I think Season 15 felt rather played out and stale, so this season very much freshened things up. Following the departure of Leela in the Invasion of Time, the Fourth Doctor was joined by fellow Time Lord Romana, played by Mary Tam. This on-screen partnership was amongst the best in all of Who, though Mary Tam only appeared in just this one season. Season 16 drew in, on average, just over 8.5 million viewers. Season 17 saw Romana regenerate off-screen into a new incarnation, as played by Lala Ward. The very same story, Destiny of the Daleks, saw the return of the Daleks and their creator Davros. It's a much weaker story compared to Genesis of the Daleks, but if you are a fan of comedic Who, then you're in luck. Douglas Adams was brought on board as script editor for this season, and his style of writing is very clear in several of Season 17's scripts. Due to an ITV strike, the ratings for Season 17 were ridiculously high. The first part of Destiny of the Daleks was seen by 13 million viewers. The programme's ratings continued to rise before peaking at 16 million on the final part of City of Death, which is also one of the most popular Fourth Doctor stories. Due to industrial action, the final story of Season 17 was never completed, though various versions have been released in the years since, including a version starring Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor. Season 17 instead concluded with the Horns of Nimon, making Season 17 6 episodes shorter than the previous season. Season 17 averaged over 11 million viewers. Graham Williams departed as producer at the end of the 17th season, but Tom Baker carried on, despite yet another series of behind-the-scenes changes. John Nathan Turner became the new producer, and even more changes were in store for the series. Season 18 began airing in August 1980. John Nathan Turner introduced numerous changes. The first one audience were greeted to was the new title sequence and theme music. It brought Doctor Who into the 1980s and feels much more modern than the previous title sequence. The Fourth Doctor was also given a new outfit, though the long scarf was retained, but in a different pattern. Visually, this and many other elements make Season 18 rather distinctive compared to previous Fourth Doctor seasons. Romana and K9, who was introduced back in Season 15 and had become a cultural icon of the time, were written out in Warrior's Gate. New companions, Adric, Nyssa and Tegan, were introduced throughout the season, signaling the beginning of the new era to come. Tom Baker didn't have the best working relationship with his producers. He clashed often with Graham Williams over story ideas. He continued this with new producer John Nathan Turner, especially when it came to all the changes being introduced. Tom Baker decided to leave at the end of the season, which makes all of the changes occurring around the Fourth Doctor all the more meaningful, as this last piece of an old era is replaced. The Master reappeared in The Keeper of Traken, now played by Geoffrey Beevers. This version is similar to the version that appeared in The Deadly Assassin, but overall the look has changed somewhat to allow for more mobility and a clearer voice from the actor. Peter Pratt was often quite muffled in The Deadly Assassin, whilst Geoffrey Beevers' voice is much clearer, but still very sinister and creepy. The Master then merges with Treemaster to create a new incarnation for himself. Anti Ailing was the Master until the series cancellation in 1989. The Master appeared in Logopolis, giving Ailing his chance to put his stamp on the character. It's interesting that for an era that generally shied away from using returning foes, that the final two stories used the Master as its main adversary. Season 18 concluded with Logopolis. Logopolis is a strange but very good story. It focused on decline and decay, as has been a theme in several Season 18 stories. This is all the more fitting for the Fourth Doctor's swan song. The typical Tom Baker bravado is less present in Season 18, which results in a more subdued and reflexive performance. This may have been influenced by the behind-the-scenes tensions, but if anything, it adds to the context of the story. The Watcher is an especially unsettling aspect of the story, whereby the Watcher is the signal that heralds the Fourth Doctor's impending death / regeneration. It's understated, but is just brilliant. Logopolis is fantastic. It is a great conclusion to this 7-season era, but like a lot of Season 18, doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the Fourth Doctor's era. Season 18 is rather different from any of the previous Tom Baker seasons. It is shot differently, it's written differently, the music is different, the companions are different. In essence, practically everything changed. This does make Season 18 unique when compared to other Fourth Doctor seasons. JNT was very much introducing his radical changes, many of which became more apparent in Season 19. Season 18 didn't capture the public's imagination the way previous seasons managed. ITV wasn't on strike when Season 18 aired and had the rights to glossy, high-budget American sci-fi series. As a result, Season 18 drew in an average audience of 5 million viewers. The search for Tom Baker's replacement was lengthy. How would JNT replace a cultural icon and one of the most popular Doctors, a fact which remains to this day? Well, Tom Baker was replaced by Peter Davison, who at 29 was, at the time, the youngest Doctor ever. So a new era was set to begin in January 1982, and Doctor Who fans were in for a ride. For many years, Doctors 5 through 8 appeared on audio adventures produced by Big Finish. It was a way of their classic adventures continuing, and in the case of the 8th Doctor, a whole new series of stories to be created. The 4th Doctor was, however, the exception. Tom Baker didn't wish to appear in a Big Finish story on the basis that he hadn't read a script that he liked. This all changed in 2012 when the first set of 4th Doctor adventures were released. Following his exit from the series in 1981, Tom Baker rarely returned to the character or the world of Doctor Who until relatively recently. One of the most memorable moments was when Tom Baker returned to on-screen Doctor Who in 2013 for its 50th anniversary to share a scene with the then incumbent Doctor Matt Smith. The 4th Doctor era, including the numerous spin-off material, is a fascinating part of Doctor Who. Tom Baker captured the public imagination, quickly cementing himself in television history. The 4th Doctor is frequently listed amongst people's all-time favourite Doctors, and you can see why. This incarnation is unique. The era in question doesn't feel attached to anything that came before or after it.